Chris is essentially a multifaceted individual, skilled in various fields, yet a master of none. He's merely an ordinary person, possessing an aptitude that allows him to acquire any knowledge instantaneously. To establish a reputation for himself, he ultimately enlisted in the Heroic League. Utilizing his gift, he performed a crucial function within the group, managing a diverse array of responsibilities, which garnered him the moniker the Extraordinary Auxiliary. However, before he could genuinely flourish and realize his full capabilities, he met an untimely demise when the Epic of Devastation commenced. It transpired during the period when the Sovereign of Slaughter, originating from the arcane realm, initiated widespread chaos and ruin across the territory of Radiance, and the valiant Evan lacked the necessary strength to thwart him. Predictably, they were defeated, and the territory of Radiance inevitably succumbed to the dominion of the Sovereign of Slaughter. Prior to perishing, the courageous Evan harbored a final aspiration. He desired Chris to ascend to the mantle of heroism. He yearned for the ability and transform this ultimate desire into actuality. However, Chris did not harbor the same emotions. After enduring countless tribulations in life, this demise felt more akin to liberation, a portal to emancipation from suffering, even if bestowed with another opportunity. Chris would have preferred to be birthed into an affluent lineage. That was his concluding contemplation before he expired, and journeyed back through time. He was reincarnated into the physique of a youthful heir of the Arcane Empire, the very realm from which the diabolic Sovereign of Slaughter originated. For supplementary elucidation, the realm of Radiance is where humanity resides, while the Arcane Empire is where demons dwell, also designated as infernal beings. The location of his birth was the Shadowfell Magic Clan, one of the 12 factions that uphold the Arcane Empire. As his ominous moniker implies, from what he comprehends, he had retrogressed 15 years into the past, 5 years preceding the commencement of. Currently, Chris is a spoiled, affluent youth, but the proprietor of the physique he now inhabits is far from agreeable. He's occupying the corporeal form of Christian Van Buren Kazar. According to Chris's prior life recollections, Christian inherited the aristocratic Van as his middle moniker, signifying he's a member of a cadet branch. The lineage of Count Kazar is a subsidiary family of Barron County, otherwise recognized as the Shadow Magic Coven. Although the Kazar family is merely an offshoot, it still commands considerable authority and sway. Owing to its favorable reputation within the Shadow Magic fraternity, their affluence only magnifies their clout. To further underscore the Kazar family's standing, there isn't a solitary sorcerer within the Magic Kingdom who fails to acknowledge their prestige. The Kazar family has 2 prospective successors, but the firstborn son, Christian, is a miscreant who perpetually attracts adversity. However, the pivotal point to observe here is that Christian was ultimately assassinated by his kinsman. This is devastating news for Chris, who has recently inherited Christian's physique and is now on the verge of death. All Chris ever desired was to be born the offspring of an ordinary, affluent family devoid of unnecessary turmoil. But lamenting his misfortune won't benefit him in any way. Therefore, he must contemplate deeply on how to avert his demise. He still possesses 2 years before Christian perishes. It's crucial to observe that he was eliminated from within the residence of Count Kazar, a lineage that places immense value on integrity. This likely signifies that Christian was utterly worthless, and consequently assassinated by his own kin, to prevent any blemish on the family's reputation. Thus, Chris aspires that if he becomes a benevolent individual and maintains a discreet existence, he might evade that fatal blow. Now that the matter of mortality has been addressed, Chris begins pondering a life of luxury with his substantial wealth. But his reverie soon encounters an obstacle when he recalls the era of devastation that will commence in the forthcoming times. The Demon King of Slaughter initiated the conflict to immolate humanity and finalize Ragnarok. By the time anyone grasped this, it was already far too late, and both the Realm of Light and the Arcane Empire encountered their disastrous finales due to the Demon King's egotistical yearning. If Chris genuinely desires to endure, he'll have to devise a method to halt the impending apocalypse. The Demon King of Slaughter is formidable on his own, but he also commands a complete legion of devoted, monstrous beings from the Arcane Empire. The sole manner Chris can cease all this mayhem is to become mightier than the Demon King of Slaughter. The sole method to achieve that is to become the Demon Sovereign himself and preside at the zenith of the Arcane Empire. He possesses 5 years before the era of devastation initiates, which is ample time to formulate a strategy. If he triumphs, There's no uncertainty that the entire arcane empire will be under his dominion. Subsequently, we observe Christian receiving a reprimand from his father for exiting his quarters. Despite being confined, the patriarch isn't, emphasizing the fact that Chris had the audacity to reveal his unsightly countenance, without adequately atoning for the humiliating spectacle he instigated. Not long ago, Count Khazar delivers a final admonition, articulating that his subsequent transgression will be his ultimate. Once his head is severed from his torso, the formidable, nearly asphyxiating presence of Count Khazar is so daunting that Chris is visibly trembling reflexively. Ultimately, he earnestly expresses remorse for all the misdeeds he has perpetrated. Presently, Chris endeavors to repair his connection with Count Khazar, because he desires to eliminate the unfavorable perception everyone harbors towards Christian. This constitutes the sole method for him to progress with his schemes, he persists in his apologies, aspiring to influence the Count's sentiments. However, it appears a few expressions of regret are insufficient. The Count possesses no inclination to accept his son's pronouncements, following all the turmoil he has generated. In the meantime, Chris is attempting to decipher what on earth this scoundrel Christian accomplished to make the Count forfeit all faith in him. There are numerous chilling tales Chris has encountered regarding Christian, that he is uncertain which one is the most current. Thus, he reminds his father that he suffered a partial memory lapse. A few days prior, due to that incident, he doesn't even recollect what he perpetrated that prompted his father to lose all confidence in him. He proceeds to explain that in a quest to recall, he contemplated his past deeds, only to discern how dreadful he had been throughout this period. He fully acknowledges the ruin he inflicted upon his father's standing. However, despite all of this, the Count remains reluctant to trust him. After all, he has encountered these justifications countless times previously. Observing no alternative method to persuade his father, Chris resolves to take drastic measures. He earnestly implores to be dispatched to the disciplinary cavern, proposing to remain there for up to a month. To demonstrate that he has genuinely reformed, here's a concise summary of the penitentiary cavern. Ostensibly, it's a location designed to confine high-ranking demons. It's devoid of light, and all 5 of the prisoner's senses are obstructed. It merely takes a few days before a detainee's psyche is utterly shattered, plunging them into insanity. Considering this, Count Khazar is skeptical that Chris would endure even a few hours, let alone a full month. Chris has already contemplated all contingencies, but this remains the sole method to secure his father's faith. Therefore, he is prepared to undertake the ordeal. Count Khazar, having witnessed Christian make innumerable grand pronouncements before, is dubious each time it culminated in disillusionment. But this instance, he's inclined to participate and grant him a final opportunity. Nonetheless, he makes one point unequivocally evident. If Chris falters in proving he's a transformed individual, after enduring a whole month there, he will be exiled from the family. Chris already comprehends that expulsion is essentially a death decree. There are innumerable adversaries Christian has accumulated throughout his life, and the instant he forfeits the sanctuary of the clan, they will all seek his demise. Yet, our protagonist embraces the challenge. However, should he prevail, he desires his father to bestow upon him a single boon. Count Khazar derided Chris's self-assurance, but consents nevertheless provided he genuinely reforms for the better, though he seriously questions if that's even remotely feasible. Later, as Chris relaxes in his opulent chambers, a subordinate arrives to apprise him that the disciplinary cavern has been readied. This individual's moniker is Cox, a half-vampire and the head servant of Count Khazar's estate. Chris acknowledges his declaration, and after a moment, he commences his journey there, transporting a suitcase upon his shoulders as he traverses the hallways. Every domestic and resident murmurs amongst themselves. They're all persuaded this ne'er-do-well must be scheming something. Once more, they recollect the current predicament he incited, disgracing the young maiden of the venomous sorcery lineage. The debacle was so severe that Count Khazar was compelled to personally lower his head and express remorse to the toxic arts clan. Now it's comprehensible why the Count was so enraged and dismissive of Christian previously. The indignity must have been so profound that the man likely desired to perish from shame. Certain individuals in the background even commence wagering that Christian won't endure more than 2 days in the disciplinary cavern. But our protagonist simply grins with self-assurance, for he understands he's on the verge of defying their anticipations. In the meantime, his younger sibling observes from the periphery, maintaining a vigilant watch on him. After a period, they ultimately reach the penitentiary grotto to underscore precisely how perilous and kindly refrain from approaching. This location is... Two grim reapers stand sentinel at the threshold. They may appear menacing, yet there's no one hindering Chris from proceeding. Nevertheless, just as he's on the verge of entering, his younger sibling calls to him from the rear. Allow me to furnish a brief synopsis of this diminutive delinquent. As you're already cognizant, he is Christian's biological junior and an exemplary pupil. Thorn Van Baron Kezar, the remainder of the presses can be deferred. 'Cause unexpectedly, this small lad executes a swift maneuver on his elder sibling, halting the pointed apex of his blade mere millimeters from Chris's eyes. While our chap exhibits no outward response, his inner spirit has practically succumbed to cardiac arrest upon witnessing the impending assault. Still, Chris maintains his composure and inquires of his younger brother, inquiring as to his purpose here. It transpires Thorn is merely present to remind his senior sibling of his inadequacy. He cautions him that should he further besmirch the family honor, he might as well be deceased. Observing this spirited young rapscallion, Chris is quite certain Thorn bore the responsibility for Christian's demise. In his prior existence, Chris had encountered Thorn previously. Throughout the epic of devastation, he was a malevolent entity notorious for his hexing magic. Regardless, Chris responded to his younger sibling with a harsh scowl. Naturally, those intense gazes caused Thorn to tremble. Meanwhile, Chris maintained his tough persona and proceeded into the cavern, sealing the entrance behind him. This exhibition of defiance left Thorn utterly infuriated, as he was unaccustomed to witnessing this facet of his elder brother. Returning to Chris, he traversed the shadowy grotto, deprived of both sight and sound. Only the slightest tingling lingered around his fingertips. Upon reflection, this feeling appeared intentionally placed, allowing captives to sense the items they carried within. Conversely, they might perish from hunger if unable to locate their provisions. Nevertheless, a typical individual would rapidly experience mental exhaustion in such an environment. After all, he's endured far worse throughout his career as a relic hunter. Frankly, having his senses deprived is precisely what he desired. This allows him to concentrate internally and introspect. It's the sole method he can mend this shattered physique. Certainly, it will require patience and a considerable amount of fortune, but with the healing expertise he acquired, back when he was known as the Celestial Healer, coupled with the bone compression technique he refined, he's confident he can accomplish this. And being the affluent individual he is now, he possesses access to mystical stones with diverse attributes. Therefore, restoring his body in this location will be effortless. He genuinely believed he wouldn't be able to acquire magical stones due to their exorbitant cost. But it appears this is one of the advantages of wealth. In his past life, Hero Evan, and he had to strive relentlessly to procure them. His initial measure will be to utilize a white mystical stone, which will cleanse any impurities within his system. It might be a tedious procedure, but it's a crucial step. He'll have to painstakingly purify the toxic accumulation throughout his physique, using white mana. Even the slightest error would inflict tremendous agony. But for Chris, it's a piece of cake. He can manage it effortlessly, without breaking a sweat. Meanwhile, returning to Count Khazar, he inquires of his valet regarding Christian. The valet discloses that Christian dutifully entered the disciplinary cavern. He's certain that Christian will be so devastated that he won't possess the energy to summon assistance. These disquieting remarks only amplify Count Khazar's apprehension. He commences to introspect, contemplating if permitting him to depart was a prudent choice. Within, the Count reminisces about Christian's auspicious prospects as a youth. Thus, he's perplexed by how he could have crumbled so abruptly. For a fleeting moment, he even ponders if Christian's extraordinary aptitudes inflated his ego, irrespective of the catalyst for his ruination. The Count would prefer Christian perish incapacitated than endure a wretched existence. Despite yearning to trust in Christian's pronouncements, he simply cannot compel himself to do so. In the end, this isn't the initial instance his offspring has deceived him with flattery. The Earl then inquires of his valet, inquisitively asking if he observed Christian transporting anything. When he progressed into the cavern, the manservant wavers to disclose anything. But under Earl Khazar's bristling gaze, he's compelled to speak. He divulges that Christian conveyed mystical stones with him into the grotto. Amongst them were dreamstones, which possess the ability to induce hallucinations. The servant is apprehensive that, given their unawareness of Christian's precise intentions, they should promptly access the cavern. But Earl Khazar retorts resolutely with an emphatic negative. Even if Christian is orchestrating something dubious, It amplifies the rationale to permit him to perish there wretchedly. A month elapses, and Earl Khazar discovers himself, positioned directly outside the cavern's threshold, prior to Chris's even emergence. The Earl has already persuaded himself that his offspring is practically ruined. By this point, yet naturally, his presumptions are entirely overturned when he observes Christian exiting the cavern, with a wide grin adorning his face. As astonishing as it may seem, there's no disputing that Christian has honored his pledge by re-emerging as a fundamentally transformed individual. The Count can't help but perceive the radiance in his son's gaze, an element he hasn't witnessed since Christian's youth. This metamorphosis might be commendable, but Count Khazar isn't inclined to relent immediately. He remains steadfast in his conviction that this minor accomplishment is insufficient to persuade him that his son is genuinely reformed. Nevertheless, Christian doesn't yield. He asserts that he'll continue striving even more diligently, if that's what's required. Christian is confident his father assumes he barely survived the cavern, but that's a far cry from reality. In actuality, Christian was so engrossed in training that he lacked the opportunity to experience boredom. Initially, he honed his physique to attain mastery in swordsmanship. Owing to the white monolith, he never experienced a depletion of energy. However, the true transformative element was the Dreamstone. The steward had endeavored to prevent him from introducing a soporific mana stone into the cavern, yet Christian was grateful he had persistently brought them regardless. The illusions induced by the Dreamstone significantly diminished the duration required for his transformation. Furthermore, he cultivated two cores within himself. Christian couldn't refrain from experiencing a sense of accomplishment for all he attained in that perilous grotto. He was certain he possessed exceptional intellect. After all, possessing two cores was not a commonplace occurrence. Consequently, he concealed his light core within his darkness core. Should anyone uncover this, their response would be nothing short of vehement, but his fortunate streak persisted. He perceived that someone within the cavern was desiring his succumb to the illusions, but Christian utilized this as an impetus to propel himself even further. Returning to the present, Christian desires to capitalize on the boon his father pledged to him. He petitions for access to utilize the Black Swamp Knights training area. Naturally, Count Khazar's expression instantly contorts with vexation at such an audacious and imprudent proposition. In the Count's perspective, a ne'er-do-well like Christian has no justification for being present there. Furthermore, the Black Swamp Knights constitute one of the three knightly orders that bolster the dark magic coven, and solely the most exceptional knights are permitted to exhibit their prowess there. However, Christian remains resolute. He isn't requesting enrollment into their ranks, merely to utilize their training grounds. He posits that observing the valor of the Black Swamp Knights will exert a beneficial impact on him. Following a short respite, Earl Khazar concurs, albeit he delivers a firm admonition: do not shame yourself before the chevaliers, lest it culminate in your demise. Christian acknowledges the caution, and prior to his sire's departure, he beseeches another boon. Subsequently, Christian arrives at the practice field. As he's attending to his own affairs, several knights in the backdrop commence whispering amongst themselves, identifying him as the inept young lord. The knights make no effort to conceal their disparaging remarks regarding the Earl's progeny, which speaks extensively about the condition of the magical realm. Here, potency triumphs over societal rank. There's an additional rationale. Christian desired to visit the Black Swamp Knights exercise yard. He seemingly aspires to gain entry to the archive. His father had informed him that he could only access the library upon procuring Lieutenant Commander Melon's endorsement letter. Only under this circumstance would Count Khazar bestow upon him the key. You see, the library safeguards all the forbidden magic texts of the Khazar lineage, and to master dark magic, Chris must acquire entry. While Chris doesn't protest the stipulation, he's perplexed as to why it's even mandated, considering he's a prominent figure within the clan. His father reminds him of the instance when Christian attempted to peddle the sophisticated grimoires on the illicit market. Even Chris has commenced to ponder the type of existence Christian led in the past. The label good for nothing is undeniably apt now. Chris's primary objective is to secure the second-in-command's endorsement. Amongst the knights gathered, Chris's younger sibling is also in attendance. He doesn't squander a moment before launching a volley of vibrant insults at his elder brother. Naturally, Christian deems it tedious that he must contend with this nuisance once more, but as he contemplates it, a grin spreads across his face. This could potentially be an advantageous occasion for him. Thurn approaches his elder sibling, commands him to depart and never look back. He implores that Christian should not squander the existence he barely rescued in the disciplinary cavern. But Chris remains as impudent as always, causing the whippersnapper to tremble once more by disclosing that it was their patriarch who granted him access to the training grounds. At that juncture, another important personage enters the scene. This woman's stare could pierce metal, and it's evident she cannot tolerate Christian's presence here. It's irrelevant even if the Count granted him authorization. For the sake of clarity, this formidable lady is Assistant Commandant Melon. Her mere presence imbues the air with 4-star dark energy, a blatant endeavor to frighten Chris into fleeing like a weeping infant. But as we are aware, this is insufficient to daunt our lad. The spectators observe how Christian is entirely unfazed by her dark energy, and even she becomes tense upon recognizing how deranged he appears. When confronted with this, Christian serenely greets her and commences the dialogue. He acknowledges the past transgressions he committed, and the resulting skepticism people harbor towards him. However, he's prepared to demonstrate his competency to utilize the training grounds. Christian suggests that he will combat one of the demons present and validate himself through victory. Expectedly, Lieutenant Commander Melon dismisses his proposition as mere jest. But Christian is not here for frivolity. In a composed manner, he requests she abstain from employing her dark energy. During their exchange, he modestly proposes a bare-knuckle duel, as his proficiency with dark energy is presently subpar, owing to his dissolute way of life. Melon contemplates his appeal. Even if this is a sparring match, she cannot permit Claire to be harmed. Therefore, she inquires once more if he genuinely possesses the capability to participate in a hand-to-hand combat. Christian remains self-assured and proclaims his desire to select his adversary, none other than his impudent younger sibling Thurn. This enrages Thurn, who is utterly incensed at being challenged by his incompetent brother. Even Melon believes Christian is recklessly tempting fate. She cautions him to select his opponent with greater prudence, given that Thurn has already attained the 2-star rank. For perspective, 2-star is a level that few 13-year-olds can achieve. Without the innate aptitude for it, it's irrelevant whether you're 13 or 23. You won't even come close to attaining this level, let alone reaching it. But as we already understand, Christian is no weakling either. He resolutely asserts his desire to confront someone superior to himself, because this is the sole method to validate himself. Battling Thorn, he contends, is the ideal option. However, there's a stipulation. If Thorn is too apprehensive to face his own brother, it alters the entire complexion of the duel. Predictably, Thurn succumbs to the provocation and consents to the duel. Shortly, the two prepare to confront each other in the midst of the practice field. The other demons encircle them, anxiously anticipating Thorn's triumph and Christian's agonizing experience of failure. But prior to the commencement of the duel, Christian inquires about the criteria for determining the victor. He recommends battling until one combatant yields. Melon, visibly irked by Christian, counters with a different proposition, that they persist until one opponent is utterly incapacitated. In this manner, she speculates, Thorn will have the opportunity to severely debilitate his sibling, as surrendering would not be an available option. Our protagonist, however, is more apprehensive for his adversary than for himself. He is reluctant to inflict serious harm upon his younger brother. Naturally, these taunts further provoke Thorn, intensifying his rage beyond measure. Yearning to demonstrate his superiority to his elder brother, Christian capitalizes on the moment and initiates his first action by delivering a resounding smack to his sibling's face. The blow is demeaning and unwarranted, but the contest has already commenced, making it entirely permissible. Thorn attempts retaliation, but Christian effortlessly evades it with a simple backward dip. Frankly, Chris recognizes this as practically a lopsided match, with the probabilities overwhelmingly against Thorn. As a demon who hasn't even attained a single star, he's utterly outmatched against an opponent wielding shadowy energy. Nevertheless, in a bare-knuckle brawl, the circumstances are slightly altered. Thorn's ungainly movements present Chris with the ideal chance to counterattack, and Chris delivers a crippling knee strike directly into Thorn's abdomen. The key to Chris's dominance in this hand-to-hand combat is the proficiency he's amassed from innumerable skirmishes in his previous existence. Furthermore, if he solely considers the radiant power mastery obtained within the penitential cavern, he's already achieved a 3-star ranking, so essentially his spoiled sibling doesn't have a prayer. Thorn appears battered and bruised after enduring such a pummeling, and even the spectators are in utter astonishment. In the meantime, Chris starts landing jabs to further provoke his younger brother. It seems his frivolous taunts are proving effective. Inwardly, he's immensely enjoying watching this spoiled child struggle. Thorn, conversely, is convinced that Christian must be employing some sort of deception. Christian assures him there are no tricks involved. It's merely that Thorn is pathetically weak. That comment strikes a nerve and Thorn feels the insult deeply, while Chris continues his playful mocking. Thorn can no longer tolerate it. He clenches his fist, dark energy emanating from him menacingly, and throws a punch. Chris effortlessly dodges the direct blow, but Thorn persists with his relentless flurry of punches, none of which even graze Chris. Eventually, Chris deflects one of the blows, and after neutralizing his younger sibling's shadowy aura, he delivers a ferocious blow upon him. That single strike is sufficient to force Thorn to expectorate blood, before crumpling to the earth. The onlookers erupt in whispers and chatter, convinced that Thorn must have lowered his defenses, or simply chose not to harm his worthless sibling. Nevertheless, Thorn being vanquished by his inept elder brother is illogical. However, Lieutenant Commander Melon comprehends precisely what transpired, and it's prompting her to become utterly frenzied with bewilderment. Chris, conversely, desires Melon's validation on whether he's demonstrated his worth, or if there remains unfinished business. Melon, still dumbfounded, affirms that he has unequivocally proven himself. This affirmation resonates with Christian like a harmonious melody, and now he's poised to initiate his subsequent scheme. Later, secluded in his chamber, Chris contemplates his attainment of a single star in shadowmancy. Given his nascent familiarity with manipulating dark energy, and the substantial remnants left by Christian, it consumed more time than anticipated regarding commanding the potency of light. Concurrently, he'll need to elevate his level considerably before it's feasible. Abruptly, his designated handmaiden, Marie, materializes at his behest. She is in actuality a formidable malevolent entity, a banshee. Chris can't suppress a slight feeling of trepidation to observe that they're utilizing a spirit as his domestic servant. He's so unnerved that he even contemplates petitioning the Count to substitute her. Regardless, he instructs her to retrieve some juice, intending to consume it prior to commencing his training. Marie acknowledges his directive, but desires verification if she should concoct the juice with human blood. Given that blood juice possesses a far superior taste to anything else, she persists in advocating for the blood juice, while Christian, utterly perturbed by her macabre proposals, simply desires strawberry juice, nothing further. A short time later, as Christian is on the verge of departing for training, the house steward hails him from behind, proposing he rethink departing. The house steward voices apprehension that Christian has been overexerting himself excessively recently. He's visibly gratified and delighted to witness how industrious and earnest the young lord has been. Even if everyone else considered him utterly useless, he's consistently had faith in Christian. Christian, nonetheless, can discern this scoundrel's duplicity. He fixes the steward with a menacing glare, desiring no approval from a humble domestic. The flustered attendant hastily apologizes, as he hadn't intended to transgress his limits with those remarks. The unfortunate fellow departs, but not before extending Christian well wishes for a productive practice. Chris, however, detects something dubious about this individual, but he can't quite pinpoint the source of his unease. Later, as Chris strolls the estate, he observes how the demeanor and the expressions in the eyes of those surrounding him have become gentler and more submissive toward him. He recognizes this as a prime chance to gradually win their favor. After all, while the opportunity presents itself, why not capitalize? After setting down his satchel, he commences brandishing his blade. A malevolent entity takes note of this and swiftly informs Lieutenant Commander Melon. He conveys that young Master Christian has appeared at the practice area once more today. Upon hearing this, Lieutenant Commander Melon becomes solemn, her intrigue aroused by Christian's conduct. She cannot disregard how remarkable his maneuvers were during his skirmish with Thurn, elegant and meticulous. She's keen to ascertain Christian's true intentions. What has her captivated is the reality that Christian managed to dissipate his brother's shadowy aura. At the opportune juncture, this discovery clarifies how he possessed dominion over the confrontation from the outset. If that is so, he may possess the aptitude to eclipse even Lord Eshid to Baron, who is the rightful successor of the primary lineage. However, Christian is merely an illegitimate child who has already forfeited his shadowy aura. Owing to his dissolute way of life, there's no possibility he can bridge the immense power disparity between himself and Lord Eshid de Baron. Melon exits, feigning ignorance of Christian's proximity. When she actually emerges, she observes that Christian has vanquished his adversary, Canon. The spectators are astonished that he bested one of their comrades, who is a 1-star demon. It's incomprehensible that this scoundrel has attained 1 star. Even Melon can't help but gaze in wonder. Christian, conversely, feels disillusioned by the feebleness of these highly esteemed Black Swamp Knights. No one appears to present a genuine threat to him. He contemplates if anyone present possesses the necessary qualities of a true warrior. Naturally, the demons who overhear Christian's provocation become visibly unsettled, perceiving how he's disparaging their ranks. One of the formidable demons, named Torin, advances to confront Christian. Witnessing this, Chris simply signals for the colossal brute to approach. He's utterly delighted that these fools are playing directly into his hands. Torin, yearning for combat, brandishes his blade and they clash in a furious exchange. As they trade strikes, Chris contemplates how he never anticipated them to willingly instruct him in their clandestine nocturnal techniques. He's documenting every motion his adversary executes, charting the maneuvers within his intellect. It isn't long before he discerns that the swordplay method Torin is employing is recognized as mud swordsmanship, a much-rumored style. Having observed the technique, he resolves to test it himself. The instant he does, he lands a pinpoint blow directly across Torin's face. With just that, the formerly formidable Torin is embracing the earth. As customary, the other demons observing this duel are in absolute astonishment, including Lieutenant Commander Melon. She now completely comprehends that Christian's prior triumph over Thorn was no stroke of luck. Once more, our protagonist voices his disillusionment. Before all of this, he used to esteem these knights highly, but now they've devolved into mere punching bags. He then proceeds to openly disparage Lieutenant Commander Melon for training such feeble and inadequate combatants. The onlookers on the periphery are fully aware that Christian shouldn't be provoking Lieutenant Commander Melon, and Melon shares the same sentiment. She's convinced that Christian's unforeseen triumphs are inflating his ego, but our protagonist is prepared to demonstrate his capabilities, and to achieve this, he directly confronts her. Naturally, the woman rises to the challenge. In a burst of fury, she brandishes her sword with such force that the sheer intensity obliterates the earth beneath them. By now, she is completely unhinged, her wrath surging after the relentless indignity Christian has inflicted upon her. This exhibition of strength is intended to demonstrate she could vanquish him instantaneously if necessary. Our hero doesn't hesitate to acknowledge that she undeniably holds the advantage at her full potential, but he contends that it's unjust, asserting that according to the regulations, the utilization of shadowy energy is solely permitted against adversaries up to a single-star tier, and given that he possesses only a single-star ranking, she cannot conceivably employ dark sorcery against him. She is merely authorized to utilize dark force. He proposes that it's only equitable they duel with timber blades. Melon accedes to his proposition, even with this impediment. She's confident she can demolish his legs with a mere wooden sword. There's no necessity to squander time with idle chatter. Let the combat commence! Assistant Commander Melon seizes the initiative, hurling her blade towards Christian. He deflects her direct assault with his own weapon, and they engage in a furious volley of strikes. Their maneuvers are so swift that the spectators can scarcely keep up. What's even more astonishing is that Christian is matching her blow for blow. Even Melon herself is commencing to grow restless, recognizing that none of her attacks are connecting. Despite being merely a feeble opponent, and logically having no chance against her, the scenario is unsettlingly reminiscent of prior encounters, where his adversaries failed to land a single strike upon him. Observing the anxiety on her countenance, Chris feels compelled to taunt her, which only serves to further infuriate her. She brandishes her blade, infusing it with shadowy energy and bringing it down with brutal force. But Christian evades it effortlessly. He lunges at her, delivering a powerful headbutt directly to her face. The impact results in a burst of blood from her nose. This attack was a calculated gamble on our hero's part. He deduced that as long as Melon's dark magic remained constrained, she would be incapable of defending against such an attack with mere physical strength alone. His intuition was spot on. Had Melon been a demon solely focused on swordsmanship, that strategy wouldn't have succeeded. Instead of panicking after having her blood drawn, Melon erupts into boisterous laughter. She finds it rather endearing and amusing, since she never anticipated him to headbutt her. Finally, she acknowledges that she was mistaken to underestimate him, and vows to personally provide him with the supplementary attention he warrants to facilitate his development. But then Christian discloses something startling. When he headbutted her, he grazed her neck. Had his fingernails been coated with venom? She would be deceased by now. Melon wholeheartedly concedes defeat and is prepared to fulfill any desire he expresses. Nevertheless, she desires another duel with him. Chris has no objections to a rematch, but he proposes a counter-request. Melon consents unreservedly. Capitalizing on the occasion, Chris inquires if she can genuflect before him. It's an audacious proposition for Melon. This is an unthinkable demand. Her allegiance lies with the primary lineage of the Shadow Magic clan. House Baron Chris recognizes her insinuation, but reassures her it will be inconsequential when he rises as the clan's next chief, effectively becoming the alpha. Melon is stunned by this declaration, dismissing it as delusional fantasy. After all, there are 5 youthful heirs acknowledged for their inheritance rights, and they are all legitimate offspring of the principal bloodline. Christian, as an illegitimate son, has no prospects. Christian displays a sly grin, reminding Milan there's no regulation, prohibiting a cadet branch member from ascending to young lord. Nevertheless, he embraces the call for another duel. However, their subsequent battle will occur in a month, and there will be no limitations, meaning they can unleash their full potential. Milan has no objections to this. In fact, she can already foresee the mortifying disgrace that lies in wait for him. Chris, conversely, cautions her against overconfidence, reminding her that life is full of surprises. With that, he takes his leave, pledging to see her again in a month's time. He privately resolves to enlighten her about where her true allegiance lies. Subsequently, Christian submits the letter of endorsement from Lieutenant Commander Melon to his father. As he tenders the recommendation letter, he also seizes the moment to offer criticism on the soldiers' deficient foundational skills. He proposes that greater emphasis be directed towards their training regimen. The narrative then transitions to a slightly earlier point in time, where Melon, having confronted Christian on the front lines, discloses all to her father concerning Christian's development. Notwithstanding his modest rank, he effortlessly triumphed over adversaries with robust groundwork. Even Melon herself was humbled by his unforeseen prowess. She confesses to relishing the combat, although the loss took her by surprise. Currently, the Count continues to gaze intently at his son, pausing for a protracted, silent interval to ascertain that the individual standing before him is genuinely Christian. At last, he proffers his hand, relinquishing the key to the library. Subsequently, Christian experiences a feeling of contentment while grasping the key. Not only did he acquire the library key, but he also garnered Melon's confidence. You see, Melon is a demonic entity from the primary lineage of the Shadowmancy clan. She was formerly a formidable 6-star high demon during the Epoch of Devastation. If Christian aspires to dominate the entire Shadowmancy clan, he must secure her allegiance. He hasn't fully persuaded her yet, but he's certain that a month will suffice. As he departs, feeling self-assured in his accomplishments, he recollects Count Khazar's perplexed yet undeniably pleased countenance. Chris discerns that even malevolent beings possess familial bonds, and he can perceive that Count Khazar is a considerably superior father than the one he had in his prior existence. Thus, he pledges to himself to make his newfound father beam with pride. Upon entering the library, Chris surveys the numerous ancient texts. These tomes are prescribed within the realm of light. They delve into subjects like blood sorcery, invocation rituals, and the study of hexes. He selects a volume from the shelf, but as he does, his spectral companion materializes abruptly. He's startled and inquires about her presence. She discloses that she once served as the custodian of knowledge in this very location. She confesses her fondness for Christian. However, he does not share her sentiments. Nevertheless, she persists in her playful advances. Much to his unease on a graver matter, she indicates that the grimoire Christian selected possesses a 4-star ranking in the dark arts, dark sorcery, a massive tome entitled Binding Seal, and she's uncertain how he intends to decipher it. Christian, inflating his chest, boldly proclaims himself a prodigy. Marie, skeptical of this bravado, nevertheless adopts a supportive demeanor and commends him. Driven by inquisitiveness, she inquires why he selected this particular volume, and he enigmatically responds that he's attempting to expose a traitor. The anticipation lingers as the scene shifts to Chris, engaged in his customary exercises with the demonic entities. He contemplates his potential culprits, those who might be the betrayers he seeks. Foremost on the roster is Thorn, his younger sibling who loathes him more intensely than anyone else within the household. Second is Cox, their steward, who isn't a progeny of the lineage, but possesses unrestricted access to the disciplinary chamber. Infernal beings hold influential individuals in greater esteem than those who possess elevated societal rank. It's illogical for Cox to be hovering around someone like him, who is merely a pushover. It's plausible there's an unseen party orchestrating Cox's maneuvers, but whomever it is desires Christian's downfall. What's most significant, however, is that Cox presented him with a dreamstone prior to his departure for the disciplinary cavern, which is essentially a condemnation to eliminate the vermin. Chris resolves to embody the scoundrel his adversaries perceive him to be. If they witness him squandering his life, they'll likely become optimistic, simplifying his task of identifying the mastermind behind the plot. He abruptly halts amidst his training, feigning a fit of rage about the arduousness of everything. He abandons the exercises for the day, opting to relax. His unexpected shift catches the others unprepared. Precisely as he anticipated, later, at the supper table with his father, Chris makes a spectacle. His father seethes with indignation, experiences a sense of utter foolishness for believing his son capable of redemption. Consumed by profound disillusionment, he departs from the dining area as Chris observes the Count in a state of sullenness. He detects a pang of sorrow, but understands it's necessary for the overall well-being of the clan. He diligently propagates falsehoods that he has reverted to his former rebellious conduct, such as harassing servants during their duties, squandering finances with reckless abandon. But whenever he desires an alcoholic beverage, his devoted handmaiden invariably prepares wine devoid of any alcohol content. Chris endeavors to persuade her to create genuine, intoxicating drinks, as this forms a crucial element of his scheme to expose a traitor. He anticipates that the individual orchestrating the conspiracy will presume he has regressed into the profligate scoundrel they intend him to be. He subsequently demonstrates his expertise in the confinement incantation, which astonishes even his steadfast maid. She remains perplexed upon witnessing his attainment of mastery over the enchantment, but Chris squanders no time boasting about his brilliance, an assertion he's been proclaiming continuously. He elucidates that throughout the period he spent stirring up trouble, he was concurrently and clandestinely studying to acquire proficiency in numerous incantations. Before he can revel in his accomplishment, his younger sibling, Thorn, enters his quarters unexpectedly. Observing this, Christian rapidly alters his demeanor and instantaneously morphs from the composed intellectual into an inebriated, debauched scoundrel enacting the persona of a failure. Thorn's eyes constrict with indignation, as he is ultimately persuaded that nothing has altered regarding his foolish brother. This irate and vehement response from Thorn validates to Chris that he is not implicated in any of the conspiracies against him. Since Thorn is innocent, he resolves to divulge a portion of his confidential information with him, disclosing that there's a betrayer within the family, a double-crosser who desires to witness his ruin. Chris intends to portray the part of the irresponsible imbecile for the time being, feigning to be precisely what his adversaries anticipate him to be, allowing for effortless recognition. To further persuade his sibling, he presents the beverage he's been consuming, permitting Thorn to inhale its aroma, revealing its counterfeit nature, intended solely to uphold his charade. While Chris remains uncertain of the informant's identity, he's confident he's nearing their exposure. Suddenly, a domestic staff member bursts in, alerted by the shattering of glass. Christian instantly reverts to his intoxicated guise, instructing the attendant to inform the head servant that the delivered wine is incorrect and to procure the appropriate vintage. The servant offers profuse apologies before apprising Chris that Cox is presently occupied. Chris, continuing his inebriated sailor impersonation, resolves to pay the head servant a personal call. His sibling, observing from the periphery, can only gape in astonishment, witnessing the remarkable authenticity of this scoundrel's portrayal of a drunken fool. Upon Christian's initial encounter with Cox, he purposefully inverts the wine bottle over the attendant's head, drenching him in its contents. He censures Cox for attempting underhanded tactics by delivering the incorrect vintage. Cox expresses his regrets and guarantees the prompt arrival of the appropriate wine. Chris, however, demands to retrieve it personally. Cox endeavors to maintain his composure, while elucidating that he is occupied with a more urgent matter and proposes that the wine be brought later. But Christian persists, seeking to provoke a reaction from Cox. Ultimately, Cox departs to fetch the wine. Chris is astonished by this scoundrel's forbearance. Although Cox can conceal his sentiments, Chris can sense the animosity emanating from him. Once Chris is solitary, He commences examining the paperwork the attendant had been compiling. As he peruses the documents, a wide grin stretches across his countenance. When he observes that Butler had been engaging in misappropriation of resources, if Cox is genuinely a betrayer, it's logical that he has manipulated the financials. But there's no concrete proof yet to verify that he is indeed the culprit. Shortly after, Cox returns with the appropriate vintage. Christian, still maintaining his facade, takes the flask and contemplates if the steward is irked with him for his insolent conduct. The house servant, however, seems to be appreciative of the chance to attend to his youthful lord. Prior to his departure, Cox conveys a communication, stating that there are Christian's companions who desire a rendezvous with him at their customary sanctuary. Naturally, Chris is oblivious to the true identities of these associates. Cox cautions him to evade them, asserting they are problematic. Yet this only piques Chris's curiosity further, prompting him to encounter these enigmatic persons. At the refuge, we are welcomed by a luxurious array of victuals, as Chris remains seated. His gaze is instantly captivated by the frightened servant girl, pouring beverages he cannot refrain from remarking on how these slobs have forced the poor lass to serve drinks to their corpulent behinds, as she presents him with a glass. He detects something amiss with it. Without delay, he flings the wine into the face of the obese man seated at the table. He doesn't mince words before, alleging they laced his beverage with a dubious substance before the situation can escalate. He utilizes shadow magic to render the maid unconscious, unwilling to expose her to the trauma of the impending events. The assembly is astonished to witness his use of dark magic, astounded that Christian has already mastered such potent techniques. But before they can respond, our protagonist slams both perpetrators onto the table, resulting in blood spatter. The overweight man demands an explanation for the assault. Chris, in reaction, brandishes a dagger, refusing to endure their charade. Following a brief interrogation, the emaciated man finally admits that they were merely complying with directives from another individual. This person had coerced them through narcotic-related blackmail. He and his companion had illicitly trafficked. Their instructions were to falsely incriminate Christian for a homicide. They planned to execute upon the housekeeper. Chris pressures them to divulge the orchestrator's identity. The gaunt man wavers, but to compel his confession, Christian asserts his dominance, making it clear who dictates terms. Unwillingly, the slender scoundrel discloses the reality. Cox is the mastermind behind the conspiracy. With their scheme unveiled, both men plead for mercy, vowing to obey any of Christian's commands. Christian, after a short period of deliberation, consents to grant them reprieve. His condition, unquestioning obedience to his directives. For assurance, he demands a second vow of compliance. Once pledged, he casts a binding enchantment upon them. The following day, Cox hastens to Count Khazar to allege that Christian has perpetrated a homicide. He asserts that Christian, inebriated, slew the servant girl attending to his beverages and discarded her remains in the river. Upon hearing this, the Count promptly commands that Christian be presented before the feudal court to account for his deeds. At the tribunal, Christian instantly proclaims his innocence. The Count, however, remains unconvinced and maintains that the accounts of eyewitnesses will substantiate his culpability. Christian serenely declares that the slaying never transpired and consequently, the witnesses must be erroneous. To validate his assertion, Christian gestures towards the maid, who, to everyone's astonishment, enters the courtroom perfectly unharmed and healthy. The two schemers commence panicking when they discern that they are about to be exposed. The maid discloses that Christian actually aided her by accompanying her to her residence and even providing funds for her rent. From her perspective, it was the two gentlemen present who attempted to end her life. The courtroom erupts in astonishment, and the two offenders are revealed for their betrayal. To definitively seal their fate, our hero utilizes his magical prowess and compels his two companions to speak like trained parrots. They are under his complete control. They confess to delivering a fabricated account regarding Christian taking the life of a youthful lady. Moreover, they were instructed by Steward Cox to incriminate the young lord for this homicide. Predictably, the steward becomes frantic and starts to vindicate himself, as if his existence hinges upon it. Which, indeed, it does. Chris anticipated this scoundrel would respond precisely in this manner, so he'd already made preparations. He speaks to his father and asks to utilize his power temporarily, since he has a pressing inquiry for Steward Cox. He vows that this single interrogation will distinguish fact from fiction. His father concurs, and swiftly grants Cox the chance to vindicate himself. Thus, Cox is directed to take the stand in the dock before Chris can ascend to the witness box. His father cautions him that should he misuse his power, he will be promptly relieved of it. Once Chris assumes the judge's bench, he proceeds to interrogate Cox with the bestowed authority. Firstly, he demands that defendant Cox pledge to utter nothing but the truth. Cox, naturally, swears immediately. Not that he possesses an alternative, but the moment Cox swears twice, our protagonist employs his binding sigil magic upon him. Even the spectators within the courtroom cannot help but observe. Their response is one of astonishment, because there's absolutely no way a mere child should be capable of wielding 4-star dark magic. Before continuing, let's learn a bit about this binding spell. Essentially, our protagonist modified the binding spell, so it could function even with a lower star ranking. However, it has supplementary requirements. Chris requires the target to make an oath twice. Now it's understandable why he compelled Cox to swear twice, and also why he made those two thugs pledge twice before seizing control of their minds. Now that the binding spell is successful, our hero interrogates this scoundrel about why he employed those two to defame him. The binding spell starts consuming Cox's mind when he attempts to evade answering. He manages to withstand the agony for a moment, but eventually discloses that he was acting on orders from someone. The individual who issued the command also menaced him regarding the corruption he had participated in, concerning the finances, leaving Cox with no alternative but to obey. Prior to compelling Cox to divulge anything more, our protagonist desires him to verify if he's referring to the misappropriation of funds he's been perpetrating without the Count's knowledge. Subsequent to confirming this minor detail, Chris advances with the legal proceedings, inquiring about the individual who instructed him. When Cox declines to answer, the agony escalates, compelling him to pronounce the name Sir Eshed. This revelation shocks everyone profoundly, as they comprehend that it was the second-born of the Shadow Magic clan, Sir Eshed Baron, who was orchestrating the events. Cox further discloses that now that he has confessed everything, he will be eliminated by Eshed. But before Sir Eshed can endanger Cox's life, our hero decapitates this betrayer directly before Count Khazar. Before anyone can commence protesting his audacious action, Chris elucidates that he penalized the transgressor under the jurisdiction he was granted by the Count. The Count then interrogates Christian regarding the rationale behind his judgment that Cox warrants capital punishment. Well, Chris's rationale is straightforward, even if this scoundrel were spared. The primary lineage would likely manufacture proof and conceal the episode. Incurring the principal family's wrath is the absolute last thing they can risk. Moreover, this occurrence has exposed to all how Eshed attempted to undermine him. In the ensuing moment, Count Khazar summons a gateway, and both parent and offspring enter the clandestine training area to have a confidential dialogue. After all, there were simply too many onlookers in the tribunal. From what the Count discerns, the sole motivation for Eshed's disruption is the inheritance dispute. The Count is acutely aware that a clan's influence and dominion are intrinsically linked to the heir they endorse. Thus, it's entirely understandable for Eshed to feel imperiled. Nevertheless, with circumstances as they currently are, the Count desires to back the eldest daughter. Given that the firstborn son is no longer a possibility, Chris subsequently proposes himself as the alternative. He desires to step forward and become the next heir. Needless to say, the Count dismisses the notion. It's improbable, yet Christian reminds his father that any individual from a collateral lineage can be acknowledged as a prospective successor should they possess the requisite aptitude. His father, nonetheless, contends that this is merely theoretical. Such an occurrence within their family is unheard of. At this point, Chris reminds his father that Ashad perceives him as a potential adversary, which is the sole reason he sought to eliminate him. The Count does concede that Christian may have been more gifted than Ashad in their youth, but currently Ashad is significantly more advanced. Chris, however, maintains that he has commenced closing the gap, and to accelerate his development even further, he desires his father to utilize his influence to endorse him for the hallowed shadow ritual, which is scheduled to occur 2 months hence. The Count reminds him that one must be at least a 2-star mage to even contemplate partaking in the ceremony. Well, that's the least of Christian's worries. He vows to attain 2 stars within the next 2 months, so he expects his father will bestow this boon upon him. Well, it appears the Count has no alternative but to comply with the young lord's request. Later we observe servants gossiping amongst themselves regarding how drastically our lad has transformed. Conjecture is circulating that the Count has been privately instructing him lately. The instruction Christian is undergoing is rumored to be so arduous that even seasoned knights can scarcely withstand it. We then abruptly shift to our protagonist, who is felling objects with the novel swordsmanship he has acquired. Observing his advancement, even the Count is flabbergasted by Christian's rapid adaptation, as if he's mastering skills in mere days. The Count is further stunned when he observes Christian execute another maneuver against a training dummy, dismembering it with precision. Seemingly, Chris merged the mud swordsmanship with the dark side sword energy, forging a supreme technique capable of slicing cleanly through obstacles that mud swordsmanship alone couldn't overcome. Naturally, the Count's spirit nearly departs his body upon witnessing such mastery. Typically, employing two techniques concurrently would hinder the casting of incantations. However, Chris dismisses it as utterly simple. In reality, it's hardly a minor difficulty for him. 15 days elapse, and we find our protagonist utterly exhausted on the ground. While this fellow can perform intricate swordsmanship magic, he cannot withstand the exertion of cardiovascular exercise after running. Worse yet, there's no shortcut to circumvent this. Since endurance develops progressively, as he regains his composure, Assistant Commander Melon appears unexpectedly. She's simply present to provide a gentle reminder regarding the impending duel, which is imminent. She's enthusiastically awaiting the destined day when they will clash once more. While he's diligently striving to enhance his abilities, she maintains that it's insufficient to bridge the disparity in strength between them. Therefore, his aspiration of witnessing her submission remains merely a fantasy. However, Chris is resolute and committed to transforming this fantasy into actuality. She admires his combative spirit, so prior to departing, she praises him for it, and expresses her desire to witness him unleash his utmost potential, simply to provide her with adequate entertainment. For clarification, Melon is presently a high-ranking 4-star combatant. Within each rank there exist 3 tiers: inferior, intermediate, and superior. Although Christian is a high-ranking 1-star, he remains significantly weaker than her. Yet it seems our comrade already possesses an ideal strategy to surmount this discrepancy. Ultimately, he's a wealthy scion now, and he intends to utilize that to his benefit. Subsequently, he encounters his malevolent spirit companion Marie, who appears breathtakingly beautiful. Given that this is their initial excursion together, she ensured to attire herself impeccably. It practically appears as though she's transforming this into a romantic rendezvous. Christian naturally refutes extending an invitation to her. He had merely instructed her to ready his luggage, and nothing more. However, considering Marie's intensely possessive demeanor, it doesn't appear as though the unfortunate fellow can get a respite. He even inquired of his father if he could dismiss this infatuated, lovesick spectral being and acquire an attendant who was human. But his father, regrettably, reminded him of the master-servant agreement Christian has with Marie. After all, a high-ranking banshee cannot be controlled without a binding agreement. What's more troubling is that if he desires to terminate this contract, he's obligated to engage in a passionate kiss with Marie. Returning to the present moment, Christian reiterates to Marie that she cannot accompany him, as his destination is a heavily populated area. He's apprehensive that she might inadvertently harm others with her ethereal energy, a prospect he naturally finds undesirable. Marie adopts the demeanor of a vulnerable, adorable, and pampered pup, after further attempts to induce guilt in him by lamenting her decades-long isolation from the outside world. She eventually utilizes her charm to persuade him, while Christian grudgingly acquiesces to her request to join him. He still insists on her maintaining a distance from other individuals. The girl instantaneously transforms from a weeping mess into an alluring, attractive woman upon receiving his consent. As she trails behind him, she exhibits considerable inquisitiveness about the objective of their excursion, to which he replies that he intends to accumulate some earnings. Marie promptly deluges him with the gold coins he instructed her to bring, reminding him that he already possesses ample wealth. So in the first place, why does he require more? He makes it evident that this sum is insufficient. And furthermore, he desires her to return the darned money regardless. She continues to speculate about his possible objectives. Perhaps he seeks additional wealth or land ownership, but each conjecture she proposes is far from accurate. Once they arrive at the designated carriage, Christian is confronted by yet another unwelcome visitor, accompanying them on this expedition. And that individual is, naturally, his younger sibling, an unforeseen development for Chris. Apparently the lad wishes to supervise him, lest he reverts to his roguish behavior. Moreover, the situation is exacerbated when this man divulges his aspirations of wagering, fellows attempting to amass a fortune like the Tate siblings. Gambling isn't inherently detrimental, particularly because they are demons, and it's a pastime endorsed by their sovereign. To ensure everything proceeds smoothly, Thurn desires to accompany his sibling, which provides Chris the sense that he's genuinely beginning to fret over him. He playfully chides the youngster about it, provoking a comical response from his younger brother. Thorn aims to triumph over him in the game, while Chris is coming to the realization he's going to thoroughly enjoy taking advantage of him. Reaching their opulent destination, both Marie and Thorn are astonished. To appropriately participate in the function, Chris distributes a collection of masks for them to don to guarantee their concealment. Furthermore, he assigns her a clandestine task that Thorn is unaware of. Chris merely directs him to comply, and soon after, they proceed into the edifice. Instantly, they are perceived as a jest by the surrounding individuals. They were like unsuspecting prey to enrich themselves after all. Inclined to amuse himself, Chris initiates a wager with his brother. The objective is to accumulate the greatest sum of money within 1 hour, and the defeated participant selects a moniker for the victor. Chris devises an extended appellation for his sibling to address him by upon his defeat, and he masterfully leverages his younger brother's pride to coerce him into agreeing to the wager. The younger brother proceeds with ardent determination. As for Chris, in his initial match, he triumphs quite effortlessly. However, he's aware of the clandestine practices of the gambling establishment. The house is cunning. It inflates your ego by gradually bestowing minor victories initially and soon after yanks the rug out from under you the instant their intended victim places a substantial wager. Although cognizant of their deceptive tactics, the same couldn't be said for his sibling. He continued to lose, ensnared in their scheme. To exacerbate matters, Chris was provoking him, aiming to amplify his losses. As they bicker about their financial setbacks, Chris observes that the swindle individuals have already set their sights on his sibling. Recognizing his naivete, he anticipates they will soon attempt to manipulate the lad. Irritated, Thorn continues to wager further, disregarding Chris's cautions. Yet subconsciously this is his desire. A period elapses and Thorn suffers additional losses. During this interval, Marie, having become unseen, has already pinpointed all the swindlers operating against them. Meanwhile, unfortunate Thorn forfeits a staggering 10,000. Following the gaming session, Chris proceeds to encounter a particular tradesman. The attendants are astonished by his unexpected presence, and he promptly directs them to summon their employer. Granthal of the Merchant Association readily aids the young nobleman. He is recognized as the astute businessman. However, the reality is, he is the proprietor of the gaming establishment they frequented. Chris solicits a confidential discussion with the scoundrel, alleging him of defrauding his younger brother using his deceptive associates. In his own defense, the shopkeeper clarifies that he lacks authority over the conduct of his employees, as his ownership extends solely to the gaming establishment. But Marie instills a genuine terror of demise in this individual, as he prostrates himself, expressing remorse for his actions. He implores for clemency and demonstrates a willingness to provide restitution for the inflicted hardships. The dialogue has progressed precisely as Chris intended, as he requests 1 million rupees for the damages incurred. Even the merchant is astonished by this demand, and reveals that they do not possess such a sum readily available. Therefore, this fellow fumbles and drastically reduces his request to 200,000 rupees. Fortunately, the merchant can manage this amount, albeit at considerable expense. Finally, Chris presents one final proposition. The scene transitions to the repercussions of Chris's acquisition. With the funds obtained, he procures a substantial quantity of battle gear, and even receives the holy sword grenade as a supplementary relic. This armament is genuinely exceptional, since it was forged through the immolation of the champion's spirit. The armament remained functional even after the hero's tainted condition, and it was once deeply revered by the infernal beings, but in its present state it lies forsaken and accumulating grime. Chris harbors a scheme for it, ultimately. Apart from that, he presents Marie with an exquisite locket she had been admiring as a present. Asserting that this bears no further implication, Marie is astonished because it's the initial instance since her demise that she's been bestowed with such a token. It holds genuine significance for her. Content with his choice, Chris determines it's time for their departure homeward. Marie reacts with a radiant grin and proposes offering him even more crimson nectar henceforth, which seems peculiar until she discloses that the strawberry beverage he's been consuming with delight already incorporated a portion of it. Our protagonist is praying it's merely a morbid jest on her part. Furthermore, Chris discerns that he's actually overlooking something, or more accurately, someone. It's actually Thorn, who was pilfered and left destitute, with a mere single rupee to his name. Thorn berates his brother for essentially slumbering away and forsaking him, because this fellow nearly found himself sold into servitude. If not for the fortunate circumstance of someone recognizing him, the slumberer reminds Thorn that he should be addressing him by a different title. After all, the lad forfeited a wager, therefore he must now endure the repercussions. A look of dread washes over Thorn's face as he comprehends. He must henceforth perpetually address his imbecile of a sibling by the honorable title of King Emperor Majesty Big Brother. Now, as he attempts to utter the name aloud, the poor chap endures the full weight of humiliation. While Chris revels in tormenting him, he demands he be addressed with due reverence henceforth. Thorn departs, pledging retribution and promising to make him rue this someday. However, I suspect that day will never arrive. Meanwhile, the mischievous Chris discerns that his unavoidable demise will be orchestrated by this lad, and he understands the vile Eshid is complicit in such a fate. As the offspring of Langam, the interim leader of his shadow magic clan, Eshid is vaunted as the primary successor to the family. And although Chris isn't precisely Christian, but simply occupying his physical form, should he become the inheritor, a confrontation with Eshid becomes unavoidable. Foreseeing his future, he is determined to exact vengeance upon Eshid, but presently he requires Melon's complete backing to contend with. The sacred weapon known as the grenade, this hallowed blade has encountered numerous trials throughout its existence. Yet the sole reason it remains untouched is because no individual has managed to subdue the blade. Our young man is inquisitive about his standing on that roster and grips it firmly, when abruptly it delivers a minor jolt, implying the sword has an aversion to his shadowy magical abilities, which is anticipated, given that it embodies luminance. Nevertheless, our friend is prepared to circumvent the regulations in this instance, and trusts that decoding the sequence of its mystical energy should suffice for him. Then he commences relentlessly striking the blade, cognizant that it's eliciting a response, demonstrating his resolve. Chris proclaims he possesses an unlimited amount of time to thoroughly pummel the weapon until it yields and ultimately submits to him. The utterly comical aspect of this entire situation is that even the armament is trembling upon hearing him announce that several days have elapsed, and Chris appeared at the practice area to encounter his father. To his astonishment, he perceives a recognizable lady before him, until the comprehension dawns upon him. This individual is none other than the leader of the Umbra, Knights, a stunning and formidable woman named Marion. She possesses a rich history, being the offspring of the senior clan's patriarch, and the mistress of the Shadowmancy Coven. Furthermore, she serves as the elder sibling to both his father and Langham. Marion safeguards the senior clan leader, and also manages any clandestine operations within the clan. In essence, he was facing the most formidable woman alive, amongst the upper echelon of the Shadowmancy Coven. This ignited his inquisitiveness about her presence there. Count Khazar informs his son of Marion's objective. It seems she desires to settle the affair concerning Cox, and deems it troubling that Chris made a rash judgment in terminating the man's life. Deducing that she might be acting as an associate to Eshid, Chris suspects he's in a predicament. He playfully comments on the peculiarity of such a prominent personage, as herself attending to a relatively trivial issue. Addressing the youth's audacity, the lady elucidates that it's not Cox she's seeking on behalf of her supervisor, but rather she's there for Chris. Upon hearing this, Chris swiftly deduces that he might have received the winning lottery ticket to finally sway the senior clan leader. Nevertheless, Marion holds a dissenting viewpoint and believes it's presumptuous of the lad to defy someone like Melon, while brandishing the power of a mere 2-star warrior. She even proposes canceling the duel, but our young man isn't prepared to surrender. He discloses his mastery over grenade, greatly astonishing the woman. Marion hadn't anticipated him to be such a rebellious individual, and even berates her sibling for uttering falsehoods about his offspring. After all, Chris intended to utilize a sacred blade in the impending contest. He provokes her, inquiring if he's forbidden from employing such an instrument, particularly since his sole ambition is to triumph. Irrespective of the means available to him, Marion unexpectedly asserts that even the senior patriarch couldn't subdue grenade, so a mere adolescent, like Chris, is destined for ruin for having the audacity to wield it. However, Chris is inclined to challenge her pride, and completely draws the sword, demonstrating that he has it entirely under his command. Initially, Miriam inquires if this is some sort of deception, or if he's utilizing a counterfeit. But the instant she grasps the blade, it scorches her hand terribly, compelling her to fling the blade away. She's astonished that Chris is casually lifting the weapon. Effortlessly. He doesn't divulge the primary reason, but he does disclose one thing. The sole reason he's capable of achieving the impossible is his brilliance. His self-assured proclamation just now impressed his father, though their focus is disrupted when Melon strides directly out and enters the dialogue. She's astonished that he managed to subdue the weapon, but contends that the result of their duel will remain unchanged, as she'll guarantee today marks his demise. The combat commences with a forceful strike from Melon, forcing our protagonist onto the defensive. Her velocity and power are on an entirely different plane. Unburdened by any limitations, Chris's assurance begins to dwindle as their blades repeatedly collide. Because Grenade is a sacred blade, it impacts the sinister energy of Melon's weapon. But an even more remarkable accomplishment is the way this young man is maneuvering with exceptional skill. While wielding the blade, he's actually repelling Melon, prompting Count Khazar to inquire how this is possible. The perceptive Marion elucidates the mechanics of his assaults. Chris is modulating the demonic energy continuously to avoid enduring the repercussions of the Holy Sword. Disengaging from the skirmish, Melon inquires if her adversary was attempting to anticipate her actions. Just then, Chris jokingly remarks that he possesses keen observation skills. Now he understands that swordplay necessitates a starting posture. To execute a complete assault, for instance, a descending strike mandates raising one's arm, and your shoulders betray the motion. This particular detail remained unchanged, regardless of whether you were a seasoned combatant or a novice. Melon resolves to go all out, and startles him with an alternate tactic. She employs a type of restraining incantation that ensnares Chris. Although he was exploiting her swordsmanship skills, Melon reminds him that she's also a sorceress in addition. Nevertheless, even this does not significantly impact him, as Chris effortlessly nullifies her assault, utilizing a cleansing relic. The guy needs to express gratitude to his father for the artifact, even though Count Khazar has no recollection of bestowing it upon him. Chris discloses that he is quite the adept pilferer, so it's all right besides that. He maintains that one's gear is also a testament to their prowess. Declaring this, he hurls a type of sphere that detonates in mid-air. Melon was diverted when the actual orb originated from directly in front of her, erupting fiercely and engulfing her in the devastation. Chris recalls acquiring this relic as well, but he understands this is insufficient to vanquish his adversary. Melon's sword slices through the flames and reaches Chris, who not only deflects the assault, but also splinters her weapon with a grin. The longer this duel persists, the more he astounds Count Kazan. Melon appears from the wreckage of the sphere, and hysterically divulges that she's experiencing far too much enjoyment. The woman has lost her mind, and she's intrigued by how he'll execute his next strike. Even Marion is apprehensive about witnessing her lash out in such a frenzy, but Chris adeptly utilizes this opportunity to his benefit, allowing her attack to graze him as he presses his blade against her throat. The match is concluded much to Melon's astonishment, Marion's dismay, and Kazan's bewilderment. Rather than behaving like a poor sport, Melon simply releases a chuckle, recognizing that he orchestrated everything just to prove a point. And now he desires compensation for the proposition he presented, although he's content with honoring her desires, if she declines to attend to him. Melon inquires if she can experience more thrilling combats, should she opt to remain by his side. Chris guarantees they'll have a multitude of skirmishes, and formally declares her his comrade. Following the altercation, we witness Marion's viewpoint, who hasn't dismissed his meticulous command of the shadowy energy. She vividly recalls her mentor, being incapable of resisting Grenade for beyond a few seconds. To wield the sacred blade, one must continuously modify the surges of dark magic, circumventing its repelling consequence. But in actual application or genuine battle, that's an incredibly challenging feat. Even the chief of the clan only believed the fiend of Gehenna, or perchance a fiendish dragon could accomplish such a deed. Or perhaps some gifted simpleton, who could effortlessly command the flow of shadowy energy without difficulty. In this instance, Chris embodies that individual, having witnessed the events of his battle. Marion is entertained by the prospect of her father's aspiration finally materializing. In the subsequent scene, we are introduced to the formidable orc chef, adeptly crafting a strawberry cake before Chris's very eyes. His prowess is undeniable, and the chef inquires as to what brings the young lord here today. Of all locations, seemingly, Chris desires to bake some cookies to present to someone special. His bothersome, peculiar companion is envious. He might be seeking a romantic partner, but Chris dismisses any such notions. And although the chef proposes to prepare the cookies for him this instance, he wishes to undertake the task personally. As he's expressing this, the lad is struck by a sudden splatter of strawberry puree. The orcs are brutally pummeling the strawberries, to the extent that Chris is questioning if this is genuine blood. Proceeding onward, we observe Chris bidding farewell to his great-aunt Marion. He was aware of her impending departure and desired to express his goodbyes, a thoughtful act she cherishes even further. He presents her with a gift-wrapped package. They're delectable cookies he prepared with affection. Much to her pleasure, Marion thoroughly relishes the present, and Count Khazar abruptly comprehends the reason. His son inquired about her preferred treat. It appears he's a skilled manipulator, attentive to even the slightest nuances. Marion is further astonished to learn the boy individually baked these for her. Upon taking a morsel, she's immediately captivated by the flavor. Chris longed to hear those sentiments. Delighted to hear that, naturally. His aunt wishes to reciprocate his kind gesture with a present, so she grants him any request. This was the opportune moment he had been anticipating. Chris intensifies his strategy by imploring her to be his genuine aunt. Henceforth, despite their existing blood ties, Marion contemplates whether there's a hidden implication behind the boy's statement, and recollects his impending participation in the dark rites ceremony. She deduces that he desires her backing in the forthcoming inheritance dispute. Regrettably, she cannot grant him such a boon. The predicament is that the delegates of the primary lineage must remain impartial in the resolution. That is their sole and unwavering precept. Chris contends that he wasn't truly seeking such assistance. His only concern is fostering a deeper connection with his aunt, Marion. She finds it incredulous that this child possesses no ulterior agenda behind his pronouncements. He delivers an Oscar-worthy theatrical display with his charming countenance, beseeching her aid. Marion appreciates his directness, and mindful of the delectable cookies he baked for her, she has developed a fondness for him. She requests additional cookies from him upon her subsequent visit, and witnessing their connection flourish in this manner, Count Khazar dabs a tear from his eye. Chris is truly giving it his all, informing his aunt. He'll ruin the flavor if she doesn't aid him when necessary. Marion beams, addressing the lad, and ultimately extending an invitation to join the Dark Shadow Knights. She's already considered his aptitude in his battle against the Melon, and there's immense capability lying dormant within him, even surpassing the former clan leader. But prior to him unlocking that potential, his adversaries will present him with numerous challenges. Marion is apprehensive about that bleak future, while Chris discloses that he's reconciled with death, provided he can overcome the hurdles in his way. Despite her proposition, Chris is certain of his triumph and guarantees her he'll prevail. This level of self-assurance is almost harmful from her viewpoint. But she understands that he's an anomaly and could be speaking the truth. Therefore, she can't deter him. Marion ascends her steed and provides the lad with a parting counsel, firmly cautioning him against the first damsel. Julianne presents herself as the most docile of the group, but Marion considers her a more formidable peril than even Ished, and asserts that he'll comprehend the reason shortly. Chris values her counsel and offers his parting words. The sequence concludes with Marion developing a favorable impression of her nephew as she reciprocates the valediction. Back in his quarters, Chris is in a state of deep thought. Marion and his father were both proficient 6-star ranked combatants, but he's yet to learn much regarding their involvement during the Great War or the capacity in which they served. The Magic Empire possessed numerous soldiers, and he surmised that the quantity would, at the very least, suffice to pose a significant challenge to the forces of good. Nevertheless, he isn't seeking a recurrence of his history. For the present, he's driven by the ambition to attain greater strength. In the subsequent scene, he partakes in a conference with his father, who summoned his son for a discussion. But to his absolute astonishment, he was incredulous that Chris had already achieved 2-star status. The lad has progressed to that level in a mere month's duration. Chris is behaving nonchalantly, reminding his father that he possesses a unique constitution. Resuming the matter at hand, he inquires about the situation. Count Khazar discloses that the primary residence has made contact, and that he informed them of the involvement of both Thorn and Chris in the hallowed shadow ceremony. Regrettably, only Thorn received authorization to partake in the contest. This is attributed to Chris's unfavorable standing of squandering their family's fortune and engaging in various nefarious deeds. The accusations, or rather irrefutable truths in this instance, are impacting our protagonist like a devastating blow from Mike Tyson. He's knocked to the ground, teetering on the brink of demise. When his father unexpectedly expresses support for his offspring, Chris rises and inquires if Langham was accountable for the ultimate decision. However, it appears someone else's influence is at play. Both father and son deduce that it's the machinations of Loin de Baron. Loin is the immediate descendant of the main family, and the primary luminary of the event. Let's delve into the true nature of the Holy Dark Ceremony. It's a rite where select aspirants partake in a unique form of darkness, derived from the dimensional abyss. Given its finite quantity and restricted distribution, contenders are expected to clash fiercely to demonstrate their aptitude. This inherently implies that the more formidable contenders acquire the greatest share of this darkness. Consequently, this becomes the crucial element in securing the family inheritance, or the title of prince. In this scenario, Logan's triumph will establish him as the 6th prince, and should that transpire, Chris's ambitions will be irrevocably shattered. Count Khazar reiterates that he will confer with them again, and they can always utilize Marion should a contingency arise. However, Chris interjects, confident in his own capacity to manage this predicament. Khazar grasps his shoulder, recognizing the lad's prowess. Nevertheless, he desires to lend his support this time, a gesture the youngster genuinely cherishes. Nevertheless, this youngster is a mischievous rapscallion who possesses his own distinct methods of operation, and he contorts his face into a grotesque, villainous expression solely to prove a point to his father. The lad inquires whether Count Tyreman's lineage is also partaking in the festivities. It transpires that the third son is indeed a contender, and that youth, who is even more of a degenerate than Chris, ended up denouncing his involvement. Witnessing his father's outburst, Chris discerns that his father genuinely cherishes his offspring. Apparently, he implores him to compose himself, as he aims to make his detractors retract their criticisms. He is cognizant that the Tyreman family orchestrates the Ebony Hunt event. Thus, he intends to become a participant in that pursuit. The scene transitions to Marion, rejoining her master after concluding her assignment. She speaks highly of Chris's merits, much to the senior clan leader's astonishment, who recollects the boy as being a simpleton and nothing more. Until this juncture, naturally, Marion surmises that he's undergone significant transformation. Thus, the elder proceeds to inquire if the youth possesses the requisites to satisfy his aspiration. The leader contemplates that this yearning, the one he so fervently craves, necessitates defying destiny itself. The ambition to shatter the bonds of mortality with prescribed sorcery. Although Marion remains uncertain at present, she can assert one thing with conviction. The lad represents his most likely opportunity to ever attain that unattainable goal. Upon hearing these pronouncements, the patriarch feels gratified even though the familial accord opposes his involvement. In the clandestine ritual, naturally, not even the Lord Patriarch is inclined to contest the decree, since he believes the boy should be allowed to discover a resolution, independently to conquer this predicament. Despite Marion's dissenting perspective, and advocating for endorsing the boy's participation, the ancient codger eerily silences her mirroring of his conduct. Marion observes that this was precisely the type of individual he embodied. He possessed extraordinary aspirations and became merciless in reaction. The senior clan leader hadn't anticipated her speaking so favorably of the lad. Proclaiming him a leech, he summons Simon, who serves as the chief major domo of the clan, having overheard the entire dialogue. Simon is entrusted with the responsibility of closely monitoring the youngster, scrutinizing his every move until the sacred shadow ritual. Although he's content to carry out this order, Simon also desires to perpetrate a minor jest upon the child. The head patriarch glances over with a frigid gaze and cautions him against becoming overly complacent. Something suggests this so-called leech is exceedingly perilous. Meanwhile, Marion hopes for the boy to exert his utmost effort, visibly apprehensive about what lies ahead. The scene transitions back to Chris, who's relishing his assessment. Attaining the 2-star rank presents a fresh hurdle, and that obstacle is progressing to the 3-star tier, which appears distant for the time being. It's precisely why he necessitates Ebony. And with it, he can amass a plethora of magic in a comparatively brief period. Due to the Tyrannoman clan organizing the Ebony Hunt competition, he's fortunate to partake currently. The sole predicament is that even after accomplishing the objective of apprehending Beast Carazzo, obtaining Ebony isn't assured. A specific prerequisite must be satisfied to completely acquire it. Chris departs the carriage, encountering the elderly vendor who seems to be empty-handed. The instant he uncovers his bag, our protagonist flings it and unveils a multitude of infernal coins as a present for him. Evidently, he wasn't desiring these as a gratuity. Chris relentlessly teases him, reminding him of his awareness of his illicit transactions and how the corpulent man has been evading taxation. Furthermore, these unexpected financial inquiries are distressing the man. However, Chris is more than content to overlook it, provided the vendor tidies up his mess. Finally, he's here for a certain something called the gray pill. It's a rare commodity found only on the underground market. And wouldn't you know it, it's exorbitantly priced. Chris is unfazed and instructs Marie to employ her techniques. The woman becomes utterly unhinged and brandishes her instruments of torment to extract compliance. It's the simplest approach since this fellow caves immediately, much to Chris's entertainment. In addition to that substantial demand, he also desires a quality dagger and some armor procured for him. Adding that, he enters the carriage, and while the elderly man inwardly curses him vehemently, he surrenders in defeat. Marie discovers that the young lord has another errand to attend to. Prior to returning home, he instructs the driver to halt and departs. Marie observes him scrutinizing some type of love potion. This rosy concoction appears to daunt our young man. While Marie is preoccupied, inquisitively asking if he's been participating in questionable activities recently, Chris refutes the accusations, while Marie's visuals intensify dramatically with an intense, focused gaze. Chris apparently requires the stimulant for another individual, specifically his aging father. Regarding the attendant, he commands the fellow to keep this dialogue confidential until death. Subsequently, Chris returns to encounter his father, accompanied by his sibling, tormenting Thorn as expected. He compels Thorn to articulate his lengthy and elaborate title. Thorn, in turn, simply cautions his brother against harm during the Ebony Hunt. Meanwhile, our protagonist playfully mocks him for expressing concern for his brother. Their dispute is interrupted by their father, who directs Chris to thoroughly defeat the Tyran family's competitors. The brilliant sorcerer pledges to return with favorable tidings. Humorously, Count Khazar remains fixated on the extended title and jests with Thorn about it. The scene then transitions to the Terramina estate, where an orange goblin attendant denies Chris entry to the estate. Chris discovers that the youthful lord, Alois, has issued a specific directive prohibiting his admittance, exerting influence with his pronouncements. The adolescent master inquires if he's being instructed to lodge elsewhere within the metropolis. The unfortunate goblin is apprehensive, but regrettably, he essentially affirms, although Chris's retinue intervenes to defend his reputation. He holds them and persists in applying coercion, inquiring as to who will bear the expense of the lodging. The attendant replies that he can simply bill the Tyrannomen household for it, which is delightful news to our protagonist. Intuition suggests this individual is poised to deplete their funds, and that's precisely what transpires, because this audacious fellow actually selects the most extravagant accommodation, which will incur a charge of 100,000 rupees for their sojourn. Chris is delighted to squander another's wealth while he has the opportunity. While they're deliberating on their subsequent course of action, the trunk springs open, revealing Marie like an unwelcome surprise. Chris, caught off guard by this development, ponders what in the world is wrong with her. She had secreted herself in his luggage, assuming the role of his devoted maid. Chris's irritation is palpable when suddenly Alois, the third prince, bellows at him for presenting them with an exorbitant bill. Our protagonist treats him with derision, despite Alois being the champion of the Ebony Hunt this year. Naturally, Chris had no intention of lodging in just any hotel. He selected the most lavish estate he could imagine. He mocks Alois for his outrage, particularly since he himself issued that very decree. Enraged, Alois unleashes a beast poised to attack immediately. This creature is in fact a Tyrannium-style beast, possessing the capability to manipulate magic. Unlike conventional taming methods, this technique employs dark magic for beast control. Through fear, specific emotions are instilled within the creature through an intricate process, demanding a period of mastery irrespective. Chris is entirely unconcerned, as he's utterly delighted to thrash the feline. He requests Marie to deploy their own countermeasure against a menacing kitten, like the one confronting them. In response, Chris readies himself a formidable staff, goading Alois to challenge him. The infuriated prince unleashes the daunting beast to assault Chris. And, frankly, he may have just parried that onslaught. But that must have required significant courage to hold his position. The creature forcibly shoves Chris aside, prompting him to deride the third prince for exploiting numerical advantage in combat. He proposes a stipulation. The terms are straightforward. Should he prevail in this confrontation, he'll enlist in the Ebony Hunt as a protector, not a driver. Alois is preoccupied with escalating rage. He mounts the beast and endeavors to obliterate Chris with a single strike. The monster actually fractures the earth on impact, but the human is vanished. He abruptly emerges from behind like a stealthy ninja and thoroughly trounces Alois with his destructive wooden staff. After enduring a substantial amount of his assaults, Alois becomes even more exasperated. However, this time, as the monster attempts to assail him, it notices something. It is repelled by the daunting aura of mortality emanating from Chris, prompting it to scamper away like a frightened feline. Alois, now feeling even more humiliated, is bewildered by the situation. The humorous aspect is that Chris merely needed to conjure an illusory incantation to deceive the beast, but he believes it functions flawlessly against simple-minded creatures. The third prince declines to yield and summons a second beast in its stead. This time it's an equine. Chris remains undeterred and imparts a fascinating piece of wisdom regarding delinquents. Then he abruptly charges forward, rendering him unconscious with a single, powerful blow. Chris finishes his statement, asserting that he's not going to wait the entire damn chapter to conclude, simply to allow his adversary to unleash a skill. Man, seriously declare this isn't Dragon Ball Z, and you're no Goku achieving Super Saiyan 3.